For years, XRP holders have been quietly fascinated by one of the strangest figures this space has ever seen. No interviews, no price calls, no podcast appearances, no influencer tours, just images, symbols, riddles, and then silence. And whether you think Bearable Guy is an insider, a very clever troll, or simply someone who understands this market at a deeper psychological level, there is one thing that is very hard to ignore if you've been around long enough. His timing has always felt uncomfortable, not exciting, not explosive, just eerily aligned with moments where the market was about to shift direction, not in price, but in structure. And today we're not doing what most people do with Bearable Guy content. We're not reacting emotionally. We're not chasing dates. We're not pretending this image is a prophecy. We're going to do something most people don't have the patience to do anymore. We're going to slow down and break it apart logically, piece by piece. Because when you zoom out, this isn't random artwork meant to farm engagement. It reads more like a narrative, a timeline, and possibly a quiet warning about how this transition actually unfolds, especially for Ripple and XRP. Now, before we go any further, understand this clearly. This is not about believing Bearable Guy. This is about understanding why these images still resonate with long-term XRP holders while most crypto Twitter laughs them off. And the reason matters more than the image itself. Because if you're still measuring XRP purely by daily candles and influencer sentiment, you're already looking at this asset through the wrong lens. And that brings us to the real question we're answering today. Not who is Bearable Guy, but why does he still matter to this community after all these years? Why hasn't he faded into irrelevance like so many other so-called insiders and anonymous accounts from past cycles? Why do his images still resurface during moments when infrastructure conversations quietly accelerate behind the scenes? Bearable Guy didn't show up last year. He didn't show up after ETFs became a thing. He didn't show up when tokenization became a buzzword. He goes back years to a time when XRP was still fighting for relevance, long before lawsuits, long before banks openly discussed blockchain rails, and long before custody and on-demand liquidity were part of mainstream financial conversations. Many of you remember that era, the 589 era. Not because it was accurate on price, but because it captured a mindset that XRP was never meant to behave like a meme asset. And that distinction matters because Bearable Guy was never right because he predicted numbers. He was relevant because his messaging consistently aligned with how institutions actually move. Quietly, slowly, methodically, without hype, without timelines, without caring what retail thinks in the short term. That's why this image deserves attention, not belief, attention, because it appears at a moment where retail frustration is high, impatience is peaking, and price-based narratives are failing to explain what's actually happening underneath the surface. And that's always been the most dangerous moment in any transition, when the crowd assumes nothing is happening simply because nothing is happening on the chart. So today, we're going to dissect this image with discipline. We're not here to convince you that Bearable Guy is right. We're here to understand why the symbolism lines up so closely with Ripple's current posture in the market: calm, non-reactive, and infrastructure first, while most retail participants argue endlessly over short-term price movement. Because if this image is saying anything at all, it's not get excited, it's not buy now, it's not the price is about to explode. It's something far less emotional and far more uncomfortable. It suggests that the real shift doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't care whether retail is ready. And if that's true, even partially, then the way most people are thinking about XRP right now is completely backwards. In the moving forward, we're going to step away from the image itself and talk about why Bearable Guy's relevance was never about accuracy, but about alignment, and why that distinction is exactly what most people still don't understand. To understand why Bearable Guy still holds any relevance at all, you have to strip away the mythology that's built up around him and look at the timeline honestly. Most people either treat him like a prophet or dismiss him as a troll. Both sides miss the point. Bearable Guy was never valuable because he called price. In fact, if you judge him purely on price outcomes, you could argue he was wrong more often than not. And that's exactly why people misunderstand his role in the first place. His relevance comes from something far more subtle: alignment. Go back far enough and you'll remember when XRP wasn't even part of mainstream crypto conversations. There were no ETF debates, no institutional custody headlines, no tokenization panels at global finance conferences. XRP was largely ignored, and Ripple was viewed as an experiment at best and a liability at worst. And yet, Bearable Guy's imagery consistently appeared during periods where the underlying narrative was quietly shifting, not visibly, not on the chart, but within the infrastructure conversations happening behind closed doors. This is where most retail investors lose the plot. Retail is conditioned to believe that relevance equals visibility. If something isn't trending, if price isn't moving, if influencers aren't screaming about it, then nothing is happening. Institutions don't operate like that. They don't broadcast their intentions. They don't rush timelines, and they certainly don't optimize for Twitter engagement. They prepare systems, negotiate frameworks, test rails, and wait until everything is operational before flipping any switches. Bearable Guy's posts tended to surface at moments when this type of quiet preparation was underway, before regulatory pressure intensified, before custody became a serious institutional conversation, before tokenization stopped being theoretical and started becoming operational. That doesn't make him an insider. It makes him someone who understood how transitions actually occur, slowly, invisibly, and long before price reflects anything meaningful. And this is where the infamous 589 era gets misunderstood. People remember it as a failed price prediction. That's the wrong takeaway. The significance of that period wasn't the number. It was the underlying assumption that XRP was being built for a system that didn't yet exist in public view. That belief wasn't validated by price. It was validated years later when the narrative around cross-border settlement, liquidity corridors, and blockchain rails began entering mainstream financial dialogue. This distinction matters because it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding in how people evaluate information in this market. Most participants look for certainty in outcomes. Institutions look for readiness in systems. Bearable Guy never offered certainty. He offered symbolic alignment with where the system was heading, not where price was going next. And that's why his imagery still resonates with long-term XRP holders while short-term traders roll their eyes. It speaks to a process that rewards patience, not precision. It reinforces the idea that price is a lagging indicator, not a leading one. Something that reacts to infrastructure and adoption, not something that drives them. So when people ask why anyone should still care about Bearable Guy, the answer isn't that they should believe him. It's that his work acts as a mirror. It reflects a way of thinking that prioritizes structure over speculation, systems over sentiment, and long-term positioning over short-term excitement. And once you understand that, the image we're about to break down stops looking like abstract art and starts looking like a deliberate narrative about transition. Not a promise, not a prediction, but a representation of how real money actually moves. Now we can actually deal with the image itself. And this is where most people either lose discipline or lose credibility. Because the moment symbolism comes in, emotion usually follows. We're not doing that. We're treating this the same way institutions treat information, as signals, not promises. Start with Bearable Guy himself. He's seated. That matters more than people realize. He's not standing, not running, not reacting, not celebrating. He's observing, calm, neutral, in control. This posture shows up again and again in Bearable Guy imagery, and it sends a very consistent message. Whatever is happening, it doesn't require panic or urgency. That alone separates this from typical crypto art, which is almost always built around motion, chaos, and excitement. This isn't a trader's posture. This is an operator's posture. And look at the chair. This isn't decorative. It's functional. It resembles a command seat, not a gaming chair and not a trading desk. The implication here is authority over a system, not speculation on an outcome. That distinction is critical because Ripple itself behaves this way. They're not chasing price. They're not responding emotionally to volatility. They're building infrastructure, forming partnerships, expanding custody solutions, and preparing liquidity rails. Whether you like Ripple or not, their posture in the market mirrors this exact same calm, non-reactive stance. Now shift your attention to what's directly in front of him, the control panel. This is one of the most important elements in the entire image. This is not a charting interface. There are no candles, no indicators, no price targets. What you see instead are lights, meters, switches. This looks like a system being monitored, tested, and gradually activated. In other words, infrastructure. This aligns perfectly with what Ripple actually sells. Not narratives, not memes, not excitement. They sell plumbing, settlement rails, liquidity routing, interoperability between legacy systems and new digital frameworks. The control panel represents readiness, not climax. And notice the colors. No flashing red warnings, no alarms, no chaos. Everything looks stable, operational, quietly online. That's a critical detail. If this were a crisis moment, the imagery would reflect urgency. Instead, it reflects preparedness. Systems are live or nearly live. Final checks, not emergency fixes. Now look behind him. You see a Christmas tree. This is where people either roll their eyes or overreach, so let's keep this grounded. Christmas, in bearable guy lore, has always been tied to timing, not price explosions, but transitions, end-of-cycle moments, closing books, shifting phases. In traditional finance, major system changes rarely happen during hype cycles. They happen near year-end during quieter periods when liquidity resets and fiscal frameworks roll over. This doesn't suggest fireworks, it suggests handoffs, old systems winding down, new systems preparing to take over, a transition phase, not a breakout moment. Infrastructure always precedes visibility. Put these elements together, the calm observer, the operator's seat, the live control panel, the timing cues, and a very specific narrative emerges. This is not about something about to happen suddenly. It's about something that is already in motion, quietly, methodically, without retail involvement or validation. And this is where most people get uncomfortable, because there's nothing here that feeds short-term excitement. No now, no soon, no payoff date, just process. That's intentional. We're going to widen the lens even further and look at scale, because the moment you understand the scale this image is pointing to, you also understand why price obsession at the retail level completely misses the point. This is where the image stops being about personality or posture and starts being about scale. And this is the part almost nobody in retail thinks deeply enough about, because retail is trained to think in percentages, candles, and time frames. Institutions think in systems, throughput, and coordination, and Bearable Guy leans heavily into that distinction here. Look through the window behind him. You're not seeing charts, you're not seeing markets, you're seeing space, planets, distance, satellites. That's not accidental. Space has always been used in this imagery to represent scale beyond human emotion, beyond daily noise, beyond the kind of thinking that argues over whether XRP is $2 or $5. This is about global settlement, cross-border liquidity, and value moving at a planetary level. Retail debates upside, institutions design reach. This is also why the image avoids anything that looks like price action. No green candles, no breakout lines, no targets. Instead, you're shown the environment in which systems operate, large, coordinated, impersonal. That's exactly how global financial infrastructure works. It's not built to excite anyone. It's built to function reliably across jurisdictions, time zones, and regulatory frameworks. Now notice what else is outside that window. You see Santa and his sleigh passing by. This is one of the clearest contrasts in the entire image. Santa represents legacy finance, familiar, trusted, traditional. It works, but it works slowly. It runs on schedules, it shuts down on weekends. It's batch-based, expensive, and inefficient by modern standards. And yet, it's still flying, still operational, still being used. That's an important point. This image is not saying legacy systems disappear overnight. They don't. They coexist during transitions. XRP isn't shown replacing Santa. It's shown replacing the delivery mechanism. Now shift your focus to the rocket. This is where the message becomes very direct. The rocket is upright, fueled, labeled, and pointed forward. It's not launching yet. That matters. Rockets aren't about hype. They're about transport. They're about moving payloads efficiently from one environment to another, and that is exactly what XRP is designed to do: move value quickly, cheaply, and at scale. The rocket being ready but grounded suggests readiness without clearance. Final checks, regulatory alignment, system coordination. This should sound familiar because this is exactly how institutional rollouts occur. Nothing goes live until every condition is satisfied, not because they're slow, because they're responsible. Now look at the astronaut standing near the rocket. This represents human interaction with the system. Institutions may build the rails, but people still use them. Treasurers, liquidity managers, corporations, governments. The astronaut isn't inside the rocket yet. That tells you onboarding is still underway, the system exists, the users are next, and then there's the cash on the ground. This is subtle but critical. The money isn't stacked, it's not exploding upward, it's flowing. That perfectly captures XRP's role. This is not a hoarding asset by design. It's a velocity asset. It exists to move, not to sit still. Liquidity corridors, on-demand settlement, tokenized cash equivalents. This is movement, not speculation. Finally, zoom out again. The Earth, the satellite, global coordination, communication, synchronization. This is the clearest signal of all. XRP is not being positioned as a national currency or a regional play. It's being framed as a global bridge asset, something that connects systems rather than competes with them. And once you see all of that together, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. This image is not about a retail run. It's not about a hype cycle. It's about a system transition. And in system transitions, infrastructure always comes first. Adoption follows. Price reacts last. When you put everything together, the message becomes uncomfortable for anyone who's been waiting on fireworks. This image isn't pointing to a hype phase. It's not signaling a retail stampede. And it's definitely not telling you that price is about to explode overnight. What it points to instead is something far more methodical, a system transition that doesn't ask for attention while it's happening. That's the part most people struggle with. Markets train participants to expect movement first and explanation later, but infrastructure doesn't work that way. Infrastructure gets built quietly, tested endlessly, aligned legally and operationally, and only then does it show up in ways the public can't ignore. By the time price reacts, the heavy lifting is already done. That's not optimism. That's how every major financial transition in history has unfolded. So no, you don't have to believe Bearable Guy is an insider. You don't have to assign him special status. That misses the point entirely. His imagery matters not because it predicts outcomes, but because it reflects a mindset, one that prioritizes systems over sentiment and readiness over excitement. Dismissing it as random art is just as shallow as treating it like prophecy. And this is where XRP holders need to be brutally honest with themselves. If your entire thesis depends on dates, targets, or influencer confidence, you're operating on borrowed conviction. That kind of thinking doesn't survive long transitions. The people who hold through these phases aren't doing so because they're patient by nature. They're patient because they understand the process. Ripple's posture in the market reinforces that. Calm, non-reactive, infrastructure first. They're not arguing with retail. They're not defending price. They're building rails, expanding custody, navigating regulation, and positioning for interoperability. That doesn't guarantee success, and anyone telling you it does is lying, but it does explain why nothing feels dramatic right now. And that's the danger zone. When nothing feels dramatic, most people assume nothing is happening. That's usually when they give up. That's when impatience peaks. And historically, that's when positioning quietly matters most. So if there's a takeaway here, it's not excitement, it's clarity. This isn't about waiting blindly or holding forever. It's about understanding what kind of asset XRP is trying to be and judging it accordingly. A system asset doesn't perform on retail timelines. It performs when systems flip. And when that happens, price doesn't lead, it reacts. As always, nothing we've discussed here is financial advice. Markets are uncertain, outcomes are never guaranteed, and timelines shift. Do your own research, challenge every assumption, including the ones presented in this video, and make decisions based on your own risk tolerance and understanding. If you found this breakdown useful, share it with someone who's stuck staring at candles and missing the bigger picture. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What stood out to you in this image, and what do you think it's really trying to say? I'll see you in the next one.